Okay.
When you're ready, I'm good too.
Well, he says, when you're ready, David, he's good.
Okay, I'm ready, Dean.
He's ready.
So you guys are all good that end, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
We're good
brilliant.
this end, aren't we? Yeah, we're good this end. Let's rock and roll.
All right. Well, hi, Katrina Fox. You know who I am. I'm David Coles, and we're running uneditedSpace. And the purpose of this is to meet people such as yourself that are putting out something into the world that's what, as I see, as to why we're speaking to you, because you're putting something out that's more progressive and potentially could create the kind of change that we're looking for in the world. So I guess just to get it started, if you could give me a little summation just on the essence of, who you are and what the essence of what you're putting out in the world and why you're doing that. And then we could probably grow and see where we go from there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. So my name's Katrina Fox and I'm a journalist. So my background is journalism. I'm from the UK originally. And I've always been involved in activism of some kind, whether that's been in the feminist movement, queer activism, and animal advocacy. And animal advocacy particularly, I've been involved with for quite some time. I went vegetarian when I was 11, when I found out the beef burger my mum was giving me came from a cow. But I didn't actually go vegan until 1996, 20 years ago, which I think goes to show just how much we are lied to, and that the multi-billion-dollar propaganda machines put out by the animal abuse industries really take a hold and influence so many of us. So I became I started out, we were talking earlier, I did a bit of acting and performance work, and then from 97 I've worked pretty much full-time as a journalist, as a freelancer both and on staff for various publications. Always tried to write about social justice issues, and apparently there's now a term for it called advocacy journalism, which I never knew. I was practicing it all these times.
Right.
And then about 3-4 years ago, I had a bit of a midlife unraveling, shall we say. It's Brene Brown, who's a fantastic author, said that's much more poetic than a crisis. So I started to do a lot of, I guess, soul searching about where I wanted to go in the future, what I wanted to do, how I could contribute more, because, the journalism industry was changing quite a lot. So I was wondering, how can I use my skills for good in a different way? And anyway, long and short of it is I decided to write a book called Vegan Ventures, Start and Grow an Ethical Business, which is the first book of its kind on how to start and run a business of any kind on ethical vegan principles. I thought that it would already have been written, but it hadn't. So I took that as a sign from the universe that I was meant to write it, as I think as many books are written in that way. And I got to interview a whole heap of vegan business owners and entrepreneurs from across the globe and distilled a lot of their insights, their expertise into the book, and then started a podcast where I also get to I continue interviewing vegan business owners and entrepreneurs so that they can help other people, because I do believe that we need more businesses that are for good. We need more businesses that are run on ethical vegan principles, that are also, take into account fair working conditions and are as sustainable as possible, because I see that as a form of activism. Sorry. So
what way then is someone setting up a vegan business different to someone setting up a regular business?
Well, there's various things. I mean, if you're starting up, say, a regular business, then, you might go for, say, the cheapest materials, the cheapest products. You're not taking time to research those products. You're just kind of throwing something else out there into the world. Whereas when you're running a vegan run business, so when my partner and I first came to Sydney, Australia from London 15 years ago, we actually started up one of Sydney's first eco and vegan hair and beauty salons. And my job was not only to pay the staff and stuff like that, was to research all the products. And it's quite time consuming. So there's that added thing that you're having to do when you're running a business on ethical vegan principles. But you're really kind of doing the best you can to put out either products or services that do as little harm as possible. And I think with a lot of businesses that brand themselves ethical, they have a real blind spot when it comes to animals. A lot of them, they can be quite good with, things like fair trade and people and things like that, but they're not so great when it comes to animals. So I think that's where vegan run businesses that also tick those other boxes are really powerful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, look, animals obviously, they're, as I've said many times, there's less laws governing how we treat animals than there are people. But obviously, if you take the laws away, we don't seem to treat anything particularly well, because we can see in countries around the world, a lot of the ones where we, do a lot of the manufacturing, the standards that they treat people in those particular countries is not as good as, say, what we would accept here. So running an ethical business is a real challenge. Running an ethical life is a real challenge.
Yeah.
So do you bring that into the package, the fact that this is a far more challenging venture to head down for a human being, and that also has a psychological, emotional component to it? Do you build that into that? Is that something that is, when you're working with people, that they, bring that forth to you of the emotional difficulty as well? Or do you keep it more on a strategic level? Or
No, definitely. I think that's really important. And one of the questions that I ask people, not only for the book, but the podcast, is how do you maintain a strong emotional well-being to be able to continue and run your business? Because, it's like you say, it is stressful. I mean, it's stressful to run a business of any kind, because, it's very unpredictable. There's all sorts kind of going on. But then you've kind of got these added extras of, particularly I think if you're a business owner and you're also an activist, so, you're still very aware and you're seeing all the awful things that are happening in the world to people, animals and planet. So that takes an emotional toll on you as a person. And on top of that, you're running a business and you're trying to do that as ethically as possible. And, often there's a lot of criticism, both from within and outside the vegan community, for example, or activist communities, that perhaps, you're not doing enough, or, there's this kind of thing. So yeah, definitely, I think that's really important. That's one of the things I like to do is not only help people with the practical strategy, but also provide them with some inspiration as well, and to know that other people have experienced that. Because I think sometimes on social media, and we do this not just if we're in business, but just generally, we curate our social media platforms. We tend to put our best foot forward, and you see the successes, but you don't often see the drama and the stress and the tears and all the rest of it behind it. So I think it's really important when, for vegan business owners and entrepreneurs to share that, which they have been doing with me, which is absolutely wonderful. And then putting that out there so that people in some way, they can breathe a bit of a sigh of relief, because then they can go, oh yeah, it's not just me who's, feeling absolutely awful. Of course, I'm going to have these, really bad days. But then other times, it's worth pushing through. Because we've got to, I really want to see ethical being normal. I gave a talk recently at a march to close down slaughterhouses, and it really makes me, I said then and I'll say it now, it really makes me quite angry that things that are ethical and are good for people, good for animals and good for the planet are more expensive. Raw materials are more expensive. So small ethical businesses are having to pay more for those individual materials. Also, the animal industries, animal abuse industries are subsidized. So things are cheaper, or they're perceived to be cheaper. But, there's a cost somewhere. As my friend Justin Mead said, who runs Vegan Style in Melbourne, he said, someone somewhere is paying for your bargain, which I really love. I think that's a really great quote.
That's right. Well, look, the other cost I think that's taken out of the package, and I think this is what ultimately we're not looking at enough, is the psychological cost, because this is where most people will take the quickest route to get what they want, and that's where integrity obviously gets pushed to the side, because to get what we want usually means that we can't maintain our integrity. If we're just to be free with fulfilling our needs, and whether it be in a business sense or a personal sense. But the true cost is the psychological cost, because to compromise your integrity, ultimately you have to live now inside a mind that has less integrity, which means it's not just other people that are being affected by it. You end up stuck in that very brain. You've built a construct of existence that now and I think that's what people don't get. They think they're doing something to serve themselves, but they're actually destroying themselves. And I think that's what I like to encourage people, perhaps like you're helping, to build an ethical business, that they're actually, yes, it may be harder. It may be more difficult in many ways. It may cost more. You may not make as much profit in the first instance. I'm sure that can be changed with time. But ultimately, you're fulfilling your soul and you're enriching yourself as a human being. And at least you're doing something where you can live with yourself and you're not psychologically damaging yourself. You're actually enhancing your own existence. And obviously, this has to start somewhere, which is why I think it's wonderful you're doing what you're doing, because they do need help and they do need advice. And I can see a lot of vegan businesses don't look like they know what they're doing when I look at them. And having worked in business and marketing myself and advertising agencies around the world, I look at what they're doing and I sometimes think, oh, they're lunging at ideas and they don't really know how to put it together, and they look often stressed and confused, and they lose that basics of just good customer service even often goes out the window. And you would think that, because they're coming from a compassionate place, that you'd go to a vegan place, for example, or a cafe would be the friendliest place you could go to. Sometimes you walk in and they just look all stressed and angry, and they barely make eye contact with you. So yes, there is a lot we can do, I think, to help people and encourage them to do this, intelligently and aware, and to use intelligent business approaches, and that can be blended in with running a good, healthy business.
I think that's true, and I think I like what you're saying there about it. It is really important, because our ideas of success are, particularly like if you're in the corporate world, like you've worked in advertising agencies, you would know it. You do end up having to, if you want to play that game, you have to sell your soul to a degree. I mean, one of the reasons I didn't try and kind of go into mainstream media, from the whole, intern reporter through mainstream media, because I knew that they would make me cover stories that would just go against everything I believe in, and that, at the end of the day, you want to be able to sleep at night. And I used to work at B&T magazine, which is a magazine for the advertising and media industries here in Sydney. I used to be the sub-editor, so I'd be putting in the headlines, checking all the copy, and I used to get so furious when adverts for things like the lamb ad would win awards. I'd be sitting there seething at my desk, and sometimes I'd even have to write a little news story about it, and I'd be like, really kind of stressed out about it. And obviously, look, sometimes, we have to, what's kind of, best for the greater good. Maybe, it's okay to suffer a bit of pain, a bit of short-term gain, pain for long-term gain. I don't know. But I agree with you. At the end of the day, you've got to put stuff out there that is good for the world, but that is also, good for you, and it's not going to destroy you. Yeah.
No. So why do you feel, though, just to dig a little deeper into the reality that we're dealing with, I can see that you're responding to it and giving something back that the world needs. And, so from that point of view, everything you're saying to me and what I've seen of you is on track. Why do you think we're in this state in the first place? Like, what do you think's going on? Why is this kind of thinking a minority? Why is it not the norm? When it's obvious, right? It's common sense in what common sense should be, but sadly, it's rare sense rather than common sense. And why do you think we're facing this particular situation that we're in the first place? Why are human beings somehow built to go down destructive pathways rather than enhancing growth pathways where we become the caretakers of the planet rather than the rapists of it?
That's a really deep and big question, isn't it? I don't know that we are built like that. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, there's two schools of thought. One is that, we're just naturally like that, and we have these awful tendencies. But there's another perspective, and I don't want to get all woo-woo, but like from the sort of spiritual world, people kind of say, well, no, actually, we are born from love, and that we spend a lot of our existence trying to get back to it. And the more you are away from it, that's why you act out and behave terribly. So those are two kind of different perspectives, which are kind of interesting. And I don't know which one is right, which one is wrong, who knows? But it certainly seems that somehow or other, and I don't know when or how it happened, but somehow or other, a certain group of, I don't know if it's a group of people or whatever, somehow their way of life became the way to do it. And, they kind of were interested in power for themselves, and not interested in the greater good. It's almost like a big, and you're into you're a psychologist, so you know this, but it's almost like a cultural collective insecurity. Because I think when people do that, when someone uses their power for harm, I do believe it comes from something inside them. We know whether they're angry, they're upset, something awful happened to them, they're desperate to get self-esteem, or whatever it is, it's something that they're lacking. I think when someone uses power to harm, their power or their money or whatever, to harm another, then they've got something lacking within themselves.
Ultimately, yes. Look, I agree 100%, because if you were completely content within yourself and had no insecurities, no fear, I think nearly every human, not all, but I think most people would behave and put decency first. But so it would appear to me, without this sort of appropriate education, nurturing, love and guidance that you're talking about, it would appear our default mode is to go to that survival mode, which is obviously about self-sustained survival, where we put ourselves before everything, because ultimately we're terrified. And ultimately we're so insecure that we try and gain our confidence, like you said, by controlling something else. And I think it just becomes a cycle of life that we feed in, and we keep trying to grow from that space without really changing the nature of how we learn and grow. And then we're wondering why the world's being destroyed, because we're not changing the nature of how we communicate. We're not looking more deeply as to why we are behaving the way we're behaving. Because I agree with you. I think it's within us to be kind, to be loving, to be thoughtful, to be aware and be considerate, to the point where we would actually not even desire to be any other way. And I think it would be a natural part of society. And you can imagine in a world like that, we wouldn't even need laws. You know, look, the only reason we need a legal system and police with guns and tasers and batons and handcuffs, I mean, ultimately the government uses brute force to make us behave, because without that threat of physical violence, they have no power whatsoever, because they're not using wisdom or intelligence or anything like that to guide us. They just simply tell us this is what's happening, and if you don't do it, we're going to get you, basically. So obviously we just keep feeding the same system, and then and so that creates more psychological repression, and then the very thing we're trying not to be becomes worse. And then, psychologically, you see more fear growing on the planet. People are becoming more scared. Therefore, they have more insecurities. Therefore, we don't behave as well. And we need more laws to control us. So
we need more products and services
and we need
as
more
well.
products to
we need to buy more stuff. Exactly.
That's right. So it doesn't stop. So we're in a cycle of behavior that is going to lead ultimately to the repression of us as individuals and to the destruction of the very planet we live on, and hence a collective chaos is what we're going to create. So I guess the question is, how do we shift that? Obviously, what you're doing is important. So, the more vegan businesses there are, obviously that is a form of activism, because you can see that changing already. It wasn't that long ago, actually, that I could go into a restaurant, say 4 years ago, and most people didn't even know what a vegan was. Today, nearly every single person you mention it to either knows, or they might even ask a question, or, so it does help, and it is making change. But do you think that is enough? Like, what do you think ultimately that we need to be doing to create that form of education and growth in society?
Well, I think it starts with children, and in like when you talked about education, it's, what are we feeding young people? I don't mean food. I mean, what are we feeding their minds and their souls as they're young? Because if you look at children, like with animals, for example, with no external human input, generally speaking, they're compassionate. You know what I mean? They love animals. They have this compassion, and they only shift away from it because they're taught that it's like brutally kind of bullied out of them, to behave in a certain way, or we're told that you're different, or that person's different, or you're better, and we start to get all these kind of hierarchies of who's better than who, and therefore that you're more deserving, whereas I don't think that, again, that's not necessarily a natural thing. So I think our schools are certainly the first thing. I know when I was at school, we were taught all the right, curriculum and stuff like that. But certainly, issues around, self-esteem, self-worth, confidence, love, compassion. I mean, I think that, those are kind of life skills. I think they are really, really important. So I think certainly making those more mainstream, I think is really, really important. So starting, when people are young, and just becoming, I suppose it's a process of becoming self-aware. And to be perfectly honest, it actually took me a while as well. Like it really is a journey. I've been an activist for a while, but for quite a while I was the angry activist, kind of thing. And I wasn't really working on my own stuff. So I think it's kind of helping people to have those tools, those facilities, so that they can become self-aware. And I think social media is it can be a good force for that, so that people are not just taking as read what mainstream media have been feeding, and now people are finding out a lot more, and then obviously they have the choice about whether to go, okay, I've had this epiphany, now I'm going to change my behavior. And it becomes this knock-on effect, because once you influence one people, you don't just influence one person, because they then go on and influence their circles. So Sometimes it can feel a bit, you probably agree with this. Sometimes it feels a bit like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I mean, we talked about, the mainstream media covering veganism in a really, really positive way. They did that about the last couple of years or so. We're starting to see a little bit of a backlash now, like, the German nutritionists in Germany are saying, no, you mustn't feed your children vegan. And you've got the dairy industry and the meat industries who are feeling very, very threatened by the rise of plant-based products and food services that are ramping up their effects and, of course, their efforts to shut us down. And obviously they've got, generally a lot more money. But we just have to keep doing as much as we can to not force people, because I don't think people necessarily come by force, but living by example. And I don't mean to sound pretentious when I say that, but do you know what I mean? Just being, I know it's a bit kind of self-help mantra kind of thing, but just, being the best version of yourself that you can be, putting your stuff out there into the world in whatever form that may be, connecting with others who are on a similar vibe. And I think that can help to inspire people. And I'm not saying people shouldn't go out there and do the, the full-on activism. Not at all. I think there's room for absolutely everything. But just do the best you can do at any particular time. And I think we'll hopefully try and get a groundswell to create change. Maybe I'm being idealistic. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's idealistic if we don't go deeper into only if. Like, I think in essence it's not, but I think it will be idealistic if we don't get more honest about what we are. As much as I can see we have this potential to be more, we've got to look at the truth of what we are without anyone stepping in and truly guiding. Let's say and there's not many people that would understand the human mind to the degree that fits into the realm of conversation we're having. There's plenty of people that are psychologists and psychiatrists, but they're trained to get people back into the very system that's destroying the planet. Ultimately, and so they're not getting it. So that means they're off track and they're not truly understanding the nature of human life and what we are. I think there's something much deeper in here that controls human thought. And I think we're being naive as to the forces at play. I think we're being naive about, how insecure and painful life truly is and how scared we really are. Most people don't like admitting their fears. So it's kind of the very thing we need to be looking at the most is what we protect the most. And I think that's where it all falls apart. Particularly when I look at the vegan movement, I see that there's a temptation to feel like you've finally found something. But what I think is dangerous in a lot of movements is that there ends up being that your own pain that you've acquired through your own life, your own misunderstood pain and insecurities, you now have an avenue for expressing it. And then it gets attached to the vegan movement and anger with those that eat animals. So now it's like anyone that's not doing what you're not doing is a target. But I think what we're doing is we're injecting all of our pain and misunderstanding into that. And then in the vegan movement, vegans are acting like they've hit the pedestal of where we need to be. But I see veganism should just be a given. It's like a very basic thing to say that we don't cause harm to poor, innocent, living creatures. I think we have a response that, like you'd be taught at school. If I picked on, let's say, a girl who would be seen as weaker than me physically, that would be seen as me abusing my power as a man. And that's why, legally, when you hear of a woman hitting a man, it's like, oh yeah, whatever. But when a man hits a woman, that's the most disgusting man on the planet. Unless you're a policeman, of course, then suddenly it becomes okay, which is really interesting. But the point I'm making is to take advantage of anything smaller, weaker, more disadvantaged, not as powerful, blah, 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 is seen as one of the worst crimes. And yet, for some reason, with animals, that's not the case. And I just think we're not looking deep enough into what's really driving this. Why do we have this need to control everything, to get power over something? It's not just animals, right? Nearly every relationship I see between a man and a woman, there's usually somebody controlling the other one.
Not just in relationships with men and women. I think all kinds of relationships.
Of course, all kinds of relationships, yes. But the majority of relationships on this planet are between men and women, and that's the most common one that's put forward to the world, and that's the most easily observable one, of course. And people that are perhaps in a gay relationship, for example, they've got all sorts of other extra pressures from society that also is going to distort the nature of their expression as well, which normal heterosexual couples don't have to deal with,
I'm just going to dispute your use of normal heterosexuals. They're heterosexuals, they're not necessarily normal. So I just want to pick you up
it depends
on
what
that.
you call normal. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
normal to me is not healthy. Normal is the norm. When I say normal,
Yeah.
normal doesn't mean it's like it's good or appropriate or have integrity or awareness or anything like that. So when I say normal, I'm just saying it's the norm of how things are seen or expressed. So for me, you know, I think change is possible, but I think we're underestimating what it's going to take. I really do. And I feel that, you know, someone like yourself could be putting in their best efforts and lots of people could be to create change. But are we changing the nature of how we function? And is facing the animal issue enough? I think it's enough to ignite us to get the ball rolling, to have a deeper look at why is this heinous cruelty still happening on the planet? You know, why in Australia do we justify and be proud of eating baby lambs? I mean, how much more evidence do we need as to how sick we've become when that is an industry where little babies are taken from their mothers? And this brings up the next point, I guess, which I'd like to put to you, is do you think that we still, even in the world of awareness and vegan movement, putting animals on a slightly lower rung, even though we're claiming that speciesism is in the home of say people that eat animals, I feel speciesism is alive and well in the vegan movement as well. A lot more subtle and harder to see, but I feel like it's still a real issue that's there. I'm wondering how you feel about that.
Well, I just want to touch on a couple of points. One of the things you said, I agree with you about the whole, you know, the way, and I think it ties into this point as well. When you talk about, you know, activists getting into the vegan movement, that, you know, we're often coming from, like you say, working from our own wounds. So, you know, we've experienced oppression or cruelty or violence, whether emotional or physical, whatever, and we find an outlet for it in various forms of social justice, of which veganism can be one. But yeah, and then that's obviously problematic because you've still got then vegans who could be racist, you know, could be sexist, could be homophobic or transphobic or ageist, all these other things.
Yes.
So it's not kind of, you know, that's why I always say, you know, even with vegan businesses, you know, you've got to be kind of, it's about animals, absolutely, but also, you know, it's like that famous saying, you know, while no one can be free while one group is oppressed. I've paraphrased that. So I think in terms of the whole speciesism, I mean, I think we're all speciesist because even within, you know, the vegan movement, you know, you kind of see these discussions. Well, what about fleas? You know, if you use a de-fleer on your dog, you're being speciesist. If your home is invaded, like if you've got one cockroach in your home coming out, you know what I mean, you pop it outside. If your home becomes totally infested, you know what I mean, with cockroaches, then, you know, you're going to get someone in to get rid of them because you're not going to want to live like that. So yeah, of course speciesism is you know, alive and well in the vegan movement as well. I think we all are. I think it's a process of learning as well. Like I think I'm really pleased to see a lot of issues around fish coming up, and Jonathan Balcom's written a fabulous new book about fish and the fact that they feel emotions, because they've been very traditionally, I think, excluded from, you know, vegan or from animal, not so much from animal rights, but certainly from the vegetarian kind of movement. On certain types of animals, if they don't look cute and fluffy and we can't relate to them, then somehow we care a little bit less than them. So, but I guess at the end of the day, again, it just really kind of comes down to that that education process about getting people to acknowledge, I guess, their own wounds. And that can be difficult. Because if someone's not ready to hear it, they'll just perceive it as you being critical. At the same time, you know, it's frustrating for us when we go on places like Facebook and social media and we see vegans spending all that time and energy attacking one another and tearing each other down. It is frustrating, but yeah, I don't know that there's a particular answer other than for us to just keep putting what we do out there. I mean, we're not going to be able to, I don't think one single person can solve all the world's problems. And I think when we try to take that on board, that's where it can become quite debilitating. It can become quite depressing, and you can end up getting burnt out and not doing anything at all, just retreating from the whole thing. So,
yes.
and I certainly used to, as an animal activist, you know, I would probably do that a lot. I'd almost feel like I've got to change everything and I've got to change it now, and I'd tie myself up in knots and get so stressed and angry that I'd exhaust myself and it would be ridiculous. And I thought, well, not much good to animals, to people when you're in that state. So I think some of it, again, it is about recognizing that, yes, there are, right this second when you and I are chatting, there are the worst atrocities happening to animals, people and planet. And it totally sucks and it's heartbreaking. But we may not be able to stop it right now. But while we're on this time and we're in, we've got a certain amount of time, we don't know when we're going to die. Well, most people don't. We've got to do what we can the best way that we can. And I know that kind of, it sounds a bit soundbitey, but I don't really see an alternative other than, to just kind of keep trying to make a difference. It's what activists have done for years. And we see some improvements, in various, mostly, or I'd say majority in human rights areas. But we see some improvements in animal issues as well. And I think we have to use the time we've got on this earth to do the best that we can.
Yeah,
I was hoping for that to sound a cop-out, but, I do think that's the case.
I was looking to explore with you before we had to shut the cameras down and restart, just in terms of talking to the truth of what's happening, because I find that's also what's lacking. And this is where I see in all movements, I guess, we're always trying to overly strategize what the right approach is. I think if everyone just sat in the truth and spoke from the truth, which means the truth of how they feel and who they are in this world, and also the truth of what they're experiencing, I think we could change quite quickly. I don't think an approach as such is necessary, because everyone's different and everyone's come from somewhere different and they have different feelings, but there's still a truth as to what we're seeing. And there's a truth to what's happening to these animals. And you said earlier, the suffering is happening as we speak. And it's atrocious, and it is potentially soul-destroying to sit in that truth. But until we rise up in that truth and move forward, then we're always going to downplay it, as a sense, because they're animals and because we've been conditioned to think that way. Even as vegans, because I can tell that by a lot of the people that I work with. I have to work with them to bring it up to an even playing field, so they, as much as they thought they were seeing animals and humans on the same plane, that to see that they're actually not. And that, if their family, for example, is associated with any kind of animal abuse, that they make a lot of allowances because it's family, because they want something from that family. But if their family were running some horrible trade and trafficking women and kidnapping them and selling them off to Russia or something, then all of a sudden they wouldn't want to associate with their family because they're hurting people, because then we see that as more directly threatening our existence. So when it's affecting humans become very sensitive, because it's really more about them, because that affects them. So I'm still a little feeling that we're still making it about ourselves too much. And I think if we truly made it about the animals and could feel more deeply what they're actually feeling and stop downplaying it, because they're people as far as I'm concerned. A person to me is not a human. A person is the essence of the entity that lives inside us. And I can see that, even in my own dogs. There's no question about it in my head that's my dog Tofu is a person. He's not a dog. He is in there, and he's just expressing to me via a dog. Just like with different people, we have different levels of equipment, different levels of communication ability, whatever. So in the human realm, we have different levels of intelligence and all sorts of things. But there's still a person inside everybody. And that person is of the same value and quality, irrespective of the species or the type of person we are. And I think we just need to get that, at least some acknowledgement of that, before we can truly move forward. Because otherwise I think we're going to see all this debating and all the messiness will continue to some degree. And I think for this to even out, we need to get to that point. So with yourself, how do you feel that you're standing up in the truth of what is actually happening? And do you find that there's still an element of social desensitization, having grown up in this world? I know you mentioned earlier, at a very early age, you made the connection between eating a burger and it being a cow and that kind of stuff. So where do you sit now as a woman and a person on this planet in that regard?
Well, I think I just want to address what you said there, because I think we have to actually, and I like the fact that you're saying sitting in the truth and being honest, because I think a lot of us aren't necessarily honest about the truth is, look, we all care about certain beings more than others. So do you know what I mean? Like you talked about family. So, you might care more about it comes to that. And I know it comes to these quote scenarios that are never ideal. You know, if the house was on fire and there was a stranger human that you didn't know and your dog was in there, who would you save? Do you know what I mean? Obviously, you know, if I was going down the street and someone was attacked and then they attacked my partner, my first instinct is going to be to protect my partner because she is more valuable to me than someone I don't know. So I think that is something that just kind of is. I don't necessarily see that we would change that because it just kind of makes sense. We have our tribes. But I think what we need to be doing is expanding that concept of tribe. And animals have been very much at the bottom of that rung because they're a different species. So, you know, it is quite a tricky, like when you said about the, you know, if the person's family was, you know, trafficking in people, for example, then I think that's because on a societal level, that is seen as worse. It's seen as shocking because, you know, we've supposedly overcome all this human slavery. Of course, we haven't in reality, but, you know, we've overcome certain forms of human slavery no longer exist. It's no longer perceived to be acceptable by the vast majority. Whereas with animal exploitation, it's still seen as the norm, you know, because of the, you know, the meat, the dairy, the egg industries, animals in entertainment. These are still being perceived as the norm. It's not as bad kind of thing. So that we need to get over. Yeah, absolutely, on a cultural level of, you know, raising animals issues, animals up to be perceived. You know, or their rights, their right to live and to live a happy life, to be on a par with humans. And we've still got a lot of work to go there. In terms of my personal experience, I don't know. I mean, you know, as I say, I think we all, and I include myself, you know, we all have our stuff that we've got to work on. You know what I mean? I don't think anybody is perfect. And I've kind of I went through the feminist movement when I was quite young and had all sorts of dramas and issues around, you know, that for certain things. And so I would like to think that, yeah, I can perceive, you know, different types of oppression and how they're linked. And that's one of the topics that I talk about. I'm talking about that in London, about intersectionality and business. And I'm glad to see these discussions start to take place within the vegan movement in a way that's respectful, because, you know, rather than kind of attacking one another, because I think we all can do better, and I include myself among that.
So for you to do better, what would that be? Because, like, I look at my life and I look at what I do and my knowledge and what I know, and do I feel like I'm doing as much as I'd like to? The answer would have to be a very clear no. But then I still got to live, and I've got to deal with life, and I've got to look after my mum. I look after dogs. I take care of my nephew because his father no longer, you know, shows any interest in his existence, and his mum has died, my sister, and so I have all these huge emotional responsibilities on a day-to-day basis, which in isolation are huge. You know, let alone then running a business, making money, paying your bills. And then you've got a society coming down on you that's telling you to behave very differently than the way you are. You get no respect for being a good person from society. In fact, you're condemned in a way because you're exposing that they're not. So you become everything that you're told to become as a kid. And then when you become it, you find out you're all alone in it in a way, and no one really cares. And then somehow you're meant to keep your head together, be positive, be proactive, and stand up there and talk to an audience that in the main isn't even asking to hear what you've got to say. So yes, I feel the blocks and I feel the emotion, and sometimes I look at that. What is that really? Am I holding back, or is this just the way it is? This is really difficult. You know, this is a tough time for humanity, and a tough time for good people to be the forerunners in a sense of who are pushing out a message into a world where the majority are quite content in many ways with their destructive ways and aren't really looking to face the truth. I can only hope for everyone's sake one day that this will be normal, and people won't have to go through what we're going through now, because I feel just life in itself is challenging enough. Just being alive is challenging. Just the weirdness of having a mortal existence, for example, just coming to terms with that, and let alone losing people that we love. So of course it becomes absurd to tack on all this other destruction and cruelty into an already difficult, challenging time in our life. So for me, I really look deeply into that, not just within others, but also myself. What can I do to become more, to take on this challenge?
But I think, you can do that in your day-to-day life, like just by being around people, like, looking after your mum or, interacting with your nephew. That, you know what I mean? You're already making a difference. I think sometimes we kind of see activism or making a difference as certain types of activities, and unless you're on a stage, talking to a big audience or, writing a book or doing all this kind of stuff or, going undercover and exposing all this stuff, which is all fantastic. I'm not knocking that in any way whatsoever. But we tend to kind of, prioritize certain types of activism and say this is better, and if you're not doing that, you're not a good activist, or you could be doing more, you could be doing better. And I think it's actually important to acknowledge that in different times of our lives, at different stages, whatever, we can sometimes do more, and at other times we're doing it differently. So I used to go out and be chased by riot police through fields, and doing all these big demonstrations, and I felt like, I'm doing activism, this is what being an activist is all about. Whereas now, I do it differently. It doesn't mean it's wrong. So, and I think just by interacting either one-on-one with people or on social media, you don't know who you're influencing. And I think that's as valid a piece of activism and making a difference as other forms of activism. So I think rather than, sometimes there's a bit of a tendency with humans, to beat ourselves up because there's so much to do and we're not doing enough, that, as I say, we just end up spiraling into burnout. And then you kind of, once you're at that stage, then you really are not doing great, because unless you are looking after yourself to a certain degree, you've got nothing left to give. It's like the old analogy of the car. Once if the oil's run out, it ain't going anywhere. So I think I would like to put maybe a bit of more of a positive spin on that, and to say that in these we can actually make a difference in those everyday activities that we're doing. Whether it's running the business, I'm sure you're influencing business people if you're going to networking events, and just for them finding out that you're vegan and maybe they're curious about it. I mean, I know I get that kind of stuff a lot. People, they're not necessarily vegan, they're not kind of into it, but they're curious. They're like, oh well, tell me more, kind of thing, and being able to communicate that in a way that they're open to hearing it. And they may not switch straight away. They may not go home that same night and think, God, that was an amazing conversation I had with Katrina, I'm going vegan. But it'd be nice if they did, but you know what I mean, it's in there. Do you know what I mean? And I've certainly had people come to me like several years later and say, I've followed you on social media and I've listened to something other, and I've actually decided to go vegan now. It's taken them 7 years, but they've gotten there. And I'm like, fantastic. So you don't necessarily know who you're influencing at the time. So I would just say, maybe give yourself a little bit of a break and acknowledge that you are making a difference in your day to day.
And you say that because I think what you're hitting on here is the absolute challenge for everyone, because sometimes the more aware you become, the more difficult life can perceptually be. And this is where I think living in the truth is essential, because, facing the truth of something is where the pain kicks in. Living in the truth is not the painful part, because once you're dealing with it and responding accordingly, then I think you can find that space you're talking about, because that's a more honest space. And an honest space, of course, yes, every individual has to be honest to themselves and say, I can't individually just change the world. And if you can find the ability to do it, well, good for you. You know what I mean? That would be wonderful if there's something to be unleashed in us, where one person could just be the first to rise forth and spread great energy across the planet, then I hope they can find that space. But in the meantime, of course, because the only reason I say that, because I don't think we should ever close off what we could or couldn't do in our lifetime. But in the meantime, yes, I think, you really laid a beautiful picture out there in terms of what everyone's facing. And I think that if people were stopping taking on perhaps the global disaster in their mind, then yes, they would be doing all more on a day-to-day basis. And if everyone was doing that, then the world would change very quickly in a nice, peaceful, calm way, rather than acting like it's a personal assault against you or me on an individual basis, which of course it isn't. It's the way it is. It's what the universe has created, and our challenge, of course, is to deal with this. What's in front of us. One of the things that I write about and teach people about is to stop seeing life as a problem, because when you see it as a problem, it gets very narrow in your mind. And I think, even the vegan movement, we don't want to get narrow about it. If anything, we want to step into the truth so we can expand our thinking and broaden our awareness and sit in a big space. Because the bigger the space you sit in, the more you can handle. When the more your life gets narrow and small and you're like worrying about everything, then every new bit of information that's challenging is even more disturbing. Or the next, if you care about animals, then the next picture you see of an animal being destroyed can be enough to ruin your whole day. So you've got to make sure you absorb these experiences, but in the entirety of your existence. And that way, I think a greater truth emerges, and then you're capable of doing more, and then you can find out what you can give to the world without being obsessed about it. Because obviously, if you become obsessed about it, then of course it all goes off track.
Well, that's true. I mean, like, for example, every time I see, like, if I go on social media and I'm flipping through my Facebook and, I'll see some kind of acts of animal cruelty that either I knew about or even I didn't. I mean, for a momentary thing, there is that thing where I literally feel like I'm being pierced through my heart. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, it's that, thing. But when you get stuck in that, like, you have to get out of that, find ways, however you can, to get out of that, because if you're constantly in that, that's when it becomes really, really debilitating. Like, for example, when I used to write articles, particularly op-eds, opinion pieces for Sydney Morning Herald and the ABC's The Drum. And if I wrote stuff around animal advocacy, I would force myself to watch, a particular piece of footage because I had to write about it. And it was heartbreaking and, soul destroying. But, I did it for that moment. And then I created something to put out there, which would hopefully, get a certain number of people thinking and maybe shift their position. But I can't then just get stuck and keep replaying that over and over, because it does debilitate you. And it is a case of, what can you do? It's like there's a nice example of a lovely woman called Elsie, who was one of the founding members, I think, of Animal Liberation in New South Wales. And she donated a typewriter for them when they first started it up. So that enabled them to do amazing stuff. She died a few years ago, but she was in her 90s and she would make jam for the raffles. Do you know what I mean? It's like she's still doing something, to enable change. So I agree with you. I think we do have to, I don't mean we put our heads in the sand and say, oh, it's all lovely and sunny. We acknowledge, there's a lot of, awful stuff going on. But, we're here. What can we, again, it just comes back to that. We're here for a finite time. What can we do? Because at the end of the day, we're not going to be, most people, I think, apparently the research has shown, they don't lie on their deathbed thinking, well, I wish I'd worked harder and spent more time at the office. Do you know what I mean? They're kind of like, I wish I'd done more. Or I wish I'd given more. I wish I'd contributed in some way. So, yeah.
Well, I think, if people were sitting in that place that you're talking about, I'll ask you in a second how you got to make that transition. Like what took you there to being calmer, perhaps, in your more mature presentation of the truth. But I agree with you. You can have people that are just furious about, say, for example, about dogs being killed in China. And yet their husband is a meat eater that eats baby lambs, and they will completely not even challenge their husband because they want that relationship. And I think that if we put more effort into what's around us and bringing truth into all of our connections, our family, number one, and if your family can't work with the truth, then you've got to accept that. But I think we have to be in the truth with everything. And that's why, like, even with my family, I've never downplayed the truth of what's happening. And just, I don't call it like, oh, well, look, you eat animals and one day you'll learn. I'll set the picture true to what it is. And, if someone says to me, I love my meat, then, I've got to reframe that and put it clearly. You love taking pleasure out of the byproducts of abuse and murder. And that's the facts. And if we stick with the facts, we seem to get okay. And then we wake up quicker. And then people can actually, like, I think we need clarity. I think there's a lack of clarity in the world. And I think we wishy-washy it all around. And that can be done in a loving way. Love doesn't always have to be just hugging someone. Love can be that you're coming from a place of love, not a place of enforcement or a place of telling someone what to do. But, I love my family members, but part of that love is to help them step into the truth, because I know when we're not, that's not a healthy place for anyone to be. So I think if we put more effort into like what you said, being good to what's around us, and get your own suburb in order, then, talk to them, have meetings in that regard. But I think, yes, we're always running around solving problems all over the place, and that's where it all goes a bit crazy.
Yeah, and also though, sometimes like family don't want to hear it from you. Like sometimes you can plant the seed, but then send them off to go and check out some external sources, and they may
Sure.
well be more open. I know I find that with my partner Tracy. Like sometimes she'll say something to me, maybe it's around business or money or whatever, and I'll be like, yeah, whatever, and I ignore it. And then maybe a few months later, I hear it from an external source. I'm like, oh, this is a fantastic idea. You know what I mean? And so sometimes we don't necessarily want to hear it directly from our family, but at least you can say, you can put it out there, and then they've got the option, the seed's been planted, and then they
Look,
can
absolutely.
go to
For me, it's about standing in the truth, though. If a family's resistant, they're resistant. But I still feel if you stand in the truth, then that is a non-threatening seed, because it's not really you. You're presenting truth, as opposed to saying this is my truth and you need to listen to me. Because ultimately, I look at this, it's like, whether it be you and I talking, this is not about you and me proving who's right or wrong. It's more like we're standing together, looking at the world together and discussing what we see together until we can find a common truth with each other, where we can all go, oh, yes, because I see that. If you take people on a journey and give them the chance, there is a common truth we can all share, where we don't argue anymore, and we don't start talking about humane killing versus so-called brutal murders of animals. It all just becomes abuse is abuse, murder is murder, cruelty is cruelty, and there's not all this silly putting on different levels of values on life. But to do that, we have to unite, at least in the truth of what is happening, and the truth that it is us as a species causing everything we see.
Oh, yeah.
But we haven't even quite got there yet. That's what I think is lacking. We're not quite admitting that it's us doing it. It's always, if there is a sense of us, it's more someone else. You know what I mean? It's that other country, that other culture, those people, meat eaters, this, that. It's never anyone but yourself ultimately. But I think we need to face that there's something fundamentally gone off track within us as a species, all of us. And I look at that in me. I can see all the forces that lead to the destruction that I see other people putting upon the planet. They're within me, but it's about me to be consciously aware enough not to allow that those mechanisms of my mind to take over. And to make sure that just because I have fears and insecurities doesn't give me the right to therefore take that out and abuse other living beings on whatever level that is.
And that's quite a sad thing that we often see, is that the oppressed often become the oppressor because they get a taste of that. They've been victimized for so long, then they get a taste of power and find, a lesser group to, exert that power over. And that, I think, is always really quite sad. And I think we saw that in that awful lamb ad that's being screened in Australia at the moment.
Multicultural one.
Yeah, multicultural. They've got, gay, trans, women, people from all different so-called diversities, all celebrating the murder of a baby. I posted on this on social media, and I'm just like, that's just so sad. That's something as well.
How do you deal with that then? Like, how have you personally, what could you share with other people listening that they could possibly think about in their own lives to go from, say, the angry woman that was running around being chased by riot police to someone now that presents a very sane, calm, but still very clear and strong message? How did you make that transition? Is that just like...
Well, like I said earlier, our public image is curated. So, I think my partner would say, I'm not always sane, and I'm certainly not always calm. And look, I'm not saying that anger is necessarily wrong. What I'm saying is, when we allow ourselves to be consumed by it, then that's when it can become destructive to ourselves and others. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these emotions. They can motivate us and somewhat. I just had an experience about 2012 where something had happened, some kind of personal thing had happened, and I was just so upset. And a really good friend of mine, and it's not that I hadn't heard it before. This is what I'm saying. Like, sometimes it just can take a while for the light bulb to go off. And a friend of mine said, well, you can't change what's happened to you. She said, but you do actually have a choice. She's a wise woman. She's lovely, my friend Georgina. And she said, you actually do have a choice in how you react. And I kind of looked at her and I said, what do you mean I have a choice? And she said, well, it's just something to think about. And I think she lent me a book. And that's right, I read Susan Jeffers' Feel the Fear and Feel the Fear. What is it? Feel the fear
and do it anyway.
Do it anyway. That's it. And I started, and it'd been on the shelf for years, and I read it. but all of a sudden, like, things started to kind of go off, all because, this one friend, I'd heard the message a while ago, but I kind of was enmeshed in this drama of, oh, well, everything happens to me, I'm just a dark sort of person. Well, no wonder. I was listening to Marianne Faithfull CDs pretty much every day, and do you know what I mean? I was immersing myself in the dark and the negative, and so that started to sort of chip away, and a few little light bulbs kind of started to go off, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I started reading more, it's a bit of a typical story. Started reading more books, did some courses and all the rest of it, and had this kind of wow moment, an epiphany. And obviously I acknowledge I was privileged enough to be able to do certain things, like go on certain courses, and I actually had a year apart. My partner and I separated for a year. We're back together, got back together after that time, but and I was kind of doing all sorts of things, and I acknowledge I was very privileged and lucky to be able to do that. Not everybody can. But even I guess going to a library and looking at a book, do you know what I mean, is a way to do it. But you've got to be ready. I guess at the end of the day, it's a bit like with coming off drugs. They say to a drug addict, unless that person wants to give up and is actually ready to make a change, it's not really going to happen. So I guess I just happened to be ready, and it took me long enough, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I'm 50 now, and it was only 4 years ago that I kind of had these epiphanies. And also, I'm not saying that that's it, I'm done and dusted now, like I'm an ideal human. It's a constant thing, do you know what I mean? We've still got our stuff that we constantly deal with, and life throws things at us, and that can raise and trigger all sorts and what have you, but I guess I'm grateful that I've got the tools and people around me as well that can kind of, if I do get a bit of it immersed in a bit of, my own drama or melodrama, I've kind of got people around me that can kind of, prod me and say, well, come on. And I can be like, yeah, okay, maybe I've been wallowing enough. Now I'll do this.
So you do consciously develop yourself all the time, is what you're saying. You're always aware of where you're at and how you express yourself.
Not always. I mean, sometimes I had a computer drama the other week, and I went into meltdown. It was a disaster. You know what I mean? I was awful. And then when it was sorted, I got on the phone to them and they sorted it. And then, like, when I was able to step back from it, I was like, oh my God, how awful was that? It's not a disaster, it's an inconvenience. Do you know what I mean? A disaster is what's going on, in the world. So it's that kind of, sometimes we lose perspective. And I think as humans, you know what I mean? We all go into those kind of moments. I think I'm probably there less time than I would. And I'm able to, but sometimes we do get in the thick of it. And so I try as much as I can to kind of consciously kind of go, okay, stop it there, kind of thing. But not always, you know what I mean? Sometimes we're still going to have.
How challenging do you find life then? Like, just being alive for you, the journey of Katrina. What is it a challenging journey? Is it emotionally, like, are you an emotional person? Is there a lot of ups and downs? And
well, I think we're all emotional people. It's just how much we are in touch with it. I mean, like you touched on something earlier when you said that people, they're not encouraged to show their fear. We're not encouraged to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is seen as something, quote, weak. And I love the work of Brene Brown, who I mentioned earlier, because she's done a lot of research on that to show it's actually, makes you courageous and builds your strength, kind of thing. So a lot of it was about that. We put up barriers to protect us, particularly if we've had bad experiences, it's like that coming from the wound. And, our natural instinct, if we have something bad happen to us, whether physically, emotionally, spiritually, then we put up barriers. And so I guess for me, it was about allowing those barriers to come down and to say, okay, they don't need to be up 24/7. There's actual real lifetimes when, you've got to be on your guard, but you don't have to be on your guard 24/7. And it was really kind of more of a learning process. But I think everybody's emotional. I think, even like I would wager that even people like Mother Teresa had her, days where, things were not brilliant. In fact, I even read a book by Pema Chodron, who I recommend actually to everyone. She's a lovely writer. She's a Buddhist nun, and she's about as evolved as you think someone could get, and she's constantly working on herself. And even she admitted that when one of her books came out, one of her contemporaries was higher in the bestseller list, and she felt jealousy. Now, she didn't feel jealousy for too long. Maybe someone else might have felt jealous for weeks, months, or years. She maybe felt it, I don't know, for a day or something. But she felt it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And then she was like, okay, now what can I learn from this? And I guess that's what, would be, I've tried to do more. I'm certainly not perfect in that department, but I think it will be useful for us all to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
You do know what I mean? But catch us. It's almost like, catching yourselves when you're in the middle of something and just go, okay, let's just unpack this a little, or how else could I react? Put it into perspective, into the bigger picture. I often find that can be quite a good thing to do. So.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I think that's one of the things we don't give each other enough is the right to feel whatever and everything. Because if you give someone the chance to feel something, they can change very quickly. But if you jump on it and judge it or put it in a box or say it's right and wrong, then you kind of leave them stuck there. And if they don't, then they might suppress that emotion or behave differently or express it somewhere else when you're not around.
Exactly.
But there's something very beautiful about if we could give each other just the space to feel, the space to be and to communicate with each other. And that's where, sometimes you've got to feel something, whether it be like you're saying, jealousy or whatever. But you've got to be able to feel it in an intelligent, mature way, obviously, to grow from it. You don't want, if you get stuck there, then you're stuck in jealousy, which is, as we all know, is a destructive emotion. But it's important we feel it because it's part of being a human being. Okay, Dean's waving, is he?
Yeah. So David's disappeared. It's a very interesting conversation, actually. It's certainly stirring up. I've got Dean here on the right who's recording with another camera. And it is very interesting, a lot of what we've been discussing. It's sort of, sometimes it's good to sit down and discuss these issues because they are quite important. Like sometimes we think, we've got to do, but sometimes it is actually good to just sit and think. And have a conversation both with yourself and with other people. I've just been entertaining people while you were away. No, I was just chatting. Dean and I were chatting, but he may keep it in. I don't know. It's like you said, it's unedited space, so. Hopefully I haven't said anything dodgy off camera. That's the thing we learn as journalists. As you probably know, David, the camera's always rolling. So I don't think I've said anything untoward. Yeah, everything's mic'd up. Yeah, exactly. I think I might have said that you might have gone to the toilet. So.
And that's okay.
Exactly. It's all part of the natural human existence.
Well, that's right. At the moment, anyway. I'd like to think there's a day where we don't need to, where we're in a more evolved space. That would be lovely just to be I would like that anyway. I'd like to be in a being that was free of some of the human functioning, but at the moment...
Well, we might be with all the developments in transhumanism. You never know.
Well, that's one way there, of course. Look, obviously, I won't push it out too much more with you because obviously these kind of topics we don't want to, wear ourselves thin either. But is there anything else that you would like to share or ask or put forward at this phase of the conversation that you think is important, or do you feel you've covered some of the key areas of what?
I think I'd just like to actually acknowledge what we're doing here today, like what you and Dean, who's here next to me, is doing in this, unedited space, is like we were just talking beforehand, is that it's important to actually create time to stop and think and have conversations, both with ourselves, which we often don't do. We're often so busy trying to do stuff and fill up that empty space, whether it's with TV or in front of the computer or some kind of activity, that sometimes we forget the value of sitting down and thinking and contemplating and having conversations with others as well as ourselves. So I quite like the fact that we've done this today because, we've, when I said, you're going to send me some questions, you were like, no, it's just all unedited. We'll just sit down thinking, cool, what are we going to talk about? But it's actually been really, really good, to sort of, discuss in a non-threatening environment to just, tease out, what
That's
we
it.
think about things, be open to other people's points of views. And,
yes.
So I think that's really helpful. So I hope whoever's watching has found it useful and helpful as well, and they can go and do that as well with themselves and with others.
Yeah, no, wonderfully said, because that's what it is, and we do, it does have to be teased out. That's a good way of putting it, because it's one thing to think something in your head, but when you communicate with another person, particularly someone that is aware and intelligent like yourself, you can't get away with just saying whatever. You know what I mean? You've got to make sure you know what you're talking about and that you're saying it correctly. And that's good for me too. Like I said something earlier and you question me like, well, wait a second on the normal thing there, David. but that's great, and that's where we not need to look at it as a defense in ourselves, but have the courage to start enjoying talking to each other. And that's what I hope to encourage is that we, because I think if we started talking more and just openly and honestly, that could be enough for us to truly change this world and make it a beautiful place to live on, and for humans to truly embrace life openly and honestly, and really see life as a beautiful experience rather than some weird thing we have to get through.
I think you're right. I think it's that combination of honest talk combined with inspired action.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's the creative component. We're always, looking beyond without being obsessed with beyond. And I think, I don't like the theories of living in the now. I think they're wonderful. And if anyone practices that, you can find peace in that, because you're really switching off the mind from thinking of the past or the future. And of course, in that purity, that is a beautiful space. But in that space in itself doesn't lead you to necessarily facing the truth of what's outside of you. A lot of people that live in the now still eat animals and justify things like that. So that kind of teaching, I think there's no reason we can't learn from our past, be creative about and inspired about our visions of the future, but make sure that that's all driven from the truth of today. Whatever is today, and I think we overthink about why we are the way we are, what it could be. I just think if we just slice through life, have an honest look at today, I think it's all there to be learnt. And I think if we did do that, I think humans would really wake up very quickly. And I think we'd stop defending our crap, and then we could move forward and embrace each other. And it could be an exciting journey ahead of us, potentially. Where we, rather than needing a new law every day to behave better, I'd like to see one more law every day being taken away, because we start realizing, we don't need that one anymore. We don't need that one anymore. And then eventually we grow up, by our age, everyone is wise and mature, and we don't need a policeman telling us whether we're naughty or not, or what speed we need to drive. We can just do it appropriately and intelligently. So, look, I think that's a wonderful finish, actually, and the way what you said before was beautiful, and I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise,
you're a wonderful speaker, a very intelligent woman, and you have an ability to articulate, I think, that is very inspiring in itself. And you've learnt wonderful things about life. So
I just want to thank you as well. Like, I've actually learned something. That's what I love about interviewing people as well, myself, because obviously I've been a journalist many years. I've interviewed people, and I get interviewed, and I actually love it because it is that two-way process. And I know I always learn something, and I've learned a lot today, this afternoon. I can feel I feel quite uplifted after our chat. So I think that validates what you just said about, sometimes it is nice to pull that out. So thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, mutual thank you. And I think we just got to keep these conversations happening, and keep sharing, and keep being honest and real. And like what you said, that settled nicely in me too, about sometimes I find myself, hard not to think too much about the big picture, and just to humble oneself to, that just doing good for your mum is still doing good, and not to forget that, and to give yourself a break in life. So, that one sat very nice. Maybe today I needed to hear that. So that was great from you, because sometimes I feel like, yes, I'm taking on too much. And I think, you do need to calm yourself down and find that peace. All right. Well, look, thank you, and might run into you at the Adelaide Vegan Festival this year.
Yes, that would be lovely.
Yeah. So anyway, look, cheers, and all the best, and I'm sure hopefully at some point we can cross paths again and stay in touch. That would be good.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, David. Bye.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Okay.
All good?
Yes, I've just turned.
He's turned everything off now.
Okay.